Master's in Science, MBA, and he's also a certified simulation professional. He has railway industry worker bronze medallion, first aid certificates, and also heavy vehicle and firearms licenses and basic firefighting. So that's quite a wide range of experience. He's also a fellow of the Institution of Engineers, chartered professional engineer, past president of the Australasian chapter of the System Dynamics Society, and former business thread co-chair for the International System Dynamics Conference. So we are looking forward to your presentation on population models. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the intro. I'll get right on with it. Okay, I'm just checking. Can everyone see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, well, as the intro said, I'm a civil engineer that got dragged into system dynamics fairly late in my career as a way of simulating construction operations. And I have a friend who's a medical doctor who had a kidney transplant, who decided that he owed it to his donor to reform the world of public health modelling, and so I got dragged along to help him out. So that's how I got involved in healthcare, and so I'm going to present a range of population models which are the sort of necessary for any kind of public health work that you do, because you need to know the population you're dealing with and the various age groups within them. Okay, now I'm going to run through a very simple or quick PowerPoint presentation to show what we're talking about, and then I'll go through the individual models using Stellar. But I have to sort of declare my interest that I'm also an Australian distributor of Stellar, which is why I'll be using it. But anything I'm showing you today, you can do equally well in VenSim or PowerSim. So the very simplest population model is just a compounding model with a simple net growth and a single stock. Because we often talk about population growth being sort of 1%, 1.2%, or in South Africa's case, about 0.9%. Come on. And when we do this kind of modelling, we use a bathtub analogy. So just as they do in climate science, the bathtub represents the population, the inflow are births and migration, and the outflow is deaths, or in some cases, emigration. So we represent this with a simple model that just has population, crude birth rate, crude death rate, and migration as in this case, just a fixed variable or a lookup table. In some models, you will see it as a percentage of the population that either immigrates or emigrates each year. This is an Australian context where we generally set a limit of what we're going to have for migration. Having done that, we can calculate the global burden of disease. If we know the population and we know the average disability, we can work out years lived disabled, and if we know the deaths and the years of life lost per person, we can work out the YLLs, which give us disability adjusted life years. Okay, the next stage up is to break the population down into a few subgroups. And this is a four-stop compartmental model that's basically looking at youth. In this case, this model was used to look at smoking. So we're looking at people in this age group who will generally take it up, and then people in the 24 to 65 age group who are trying to give it up. So this is a somewhat more detailed model, but we need more detail to build it. First of all, we need the individual death rates for the groups, and we need to be able to split migration up. In some countries, migration isn't all that important. Like in China, net emigration is about 1 million people in 1.4 billion, so it's not a big deal. For Australia, we have as many migrants as we do newborns every year. Okay, the next step is to actually stratify it by age and sex using, in Stella, we use the conveyor structure. So I think the Vensim terminology is subscripting, but this little box indicates that I've got an array by age and sex. So typically it's 0 to 100 by male and female. And so births get in year 1, and every year they hop off the conveyor and come back around. But again, here we need to know individual crude death rates, and we need to have some sense of the age distribution of migration. So basically, here's what we're doing in the conveyor structure. We have one conveyor for boys and one conveyor for girls. And just like in a department store, you sort of get off on one floor, go around and get on and go up to the next floor. You can think of people that die as people that sort of jump off the conveyor, and people that immigrate in jump onto a conveyor. And when do they get to the very top? So typically we don't have too much interest in people over about 105. Those individual people, of course, would be very interested, but from a population health, and unless you're looking at aged care, there's not a lot that happens at that age group. And when we get, one of the advantages of having individual year of age is that we can do 5-year age groups and look at population pyramids, which change over time, and look at the percentage of people that are 65 plus, which is important in terms of is our government pension going to be able to afford to look after them all? Okay, and one of the key inputs is the birth rate and looking at total fertility rates. So again, these are just assessments, and no one really knows what's going to happen out into the future. So we can do scenarios to say, well, what if it is 1.9? What if it's 1.65? What if it's only 1.42? The lower two obviously being a lot less than replacement rate. And then typically we have some kind of intervention that we want to try out in the model. So this is the model of trying to increase birth rates. So we have a year that we want to start the intervention. Are we going to turn it on or off so that we can set up these controls in a control panel? How long will it take for this program to be fully implemented? What would be the maximum increase in conception rate if we gave everybody a TV? Well, it might be a decrease in conception rate. And then how long will it take for that to actually result in a change to the birth rate? Okay, now I need to stop presenting and start again with the model. I'll make these slides and the models available to anyone that wants them. But here is the first simple model using just aggregate population, and I'm using the population for South Africa at around 2000, which was about 44.9 million. I apologise if that's not the correct number, but it's what I got off the internet. And I'm going to run this model from 2000 to 2060. So I have a slightly different, and here I've just got a fixed growth rate of 0.95%, and here I've got a slightly different growth rate where I've used a graphical function, or what would be called a lookup table in VenSim, I think. And if we run those, you can see that we get sort of much the same answer. At the end, we're calibrated to be the same, but the aggregate 2 population rises faster and then tapers off, whereas a straight compound growth is just going to grow exponentially. So nothing terribly magical in that. If I go to the next one, which has, again, the South African population, same population, accrued birth rate, starting off at 23.32 per thousand, and dropping to 13.33 in 2060, and accrued death rate, which is sort of around 11 or 12, and then drops for a while, and then increases as the population gets older. Now, to get these, I've just used numbers that I got off Worldometer. And here I've actually got the population as effectively a percentage, so a net migration per 1,000 people. So if I run this, nothing happens because I haven't switched it on. So I'm using modules in Stellar, and you can sort of switch them all on and switch them all off. So I'm going to switch these two on and go back down into here and rerun this. And so you can see that this individual model very closely tracks with sort of published population projections, and we can now work out sort of natural births, deaths, natural increase, and migration. And you can see that towards 2060, the deaths are going to outgrow the natural births, so the natural increase will in fact go negative. And most of the projections show South Africa's population plateauing at around the 2060 mark. So that's what's causing that. We can also, again, I've also got in this model a model of the Nigerian population, being one of your not so near neighbours, but their crude birth rate was up in the 40s in 2000, and their death rate is predicted to drop as they get more public health. So if we actually run that model, just again switch that on. You can see that while you're at sort of about now, your population is up to 60 odd million. The Nigerian population is about 214, but in 40 years' time, this is going to be 450, and yours is going to be about 80. So just using very simple models, we can get some very powerful predictions. Okay, I'm now going to go up to, and this is the burden of disease, where I've got the population and I'm using average disability percentages here from, these are about Australian numbers, so about 15% average disability, and in South Africa's case, years of life lost a bit higher. So if I multiply them out, I can get YLLs, YLDs to give you disability adjusted life years. If I put a value on it in Australia, we have a value of $50,000 per disability adjusted life year. So you can work out the accumulated social cost of the burden of disease. So it's sort of trillions of dollars in accumulated social cost. $90 trillion over 60 years. Okay, so I've done a similar model for Australia, but just to show the comparisons, let's see if I need to put, if there are any sort of questions that come up, can you please show them on the screen? I can't actually see the conversations at the moment, so feel free to interrupt. So if I,
yeah,
all my other models,
if I see anyone's hand, I'll give them an opportunity to ask a question.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to reset the run spec on these models to 2016.5, which was the date of the Australian census before last. But you can see here that I've done models of the Swiss population, Danish, Nigeria, Peru, and also South Africa. So it works very generically. So for the Australian case, oops, let's go up and I'll switch all of these on. Don't need that. So that causes a problem. In the Australian case, so I've got immigration fairly flat, which it was at about 235 until COVID hit, but it'll probably come back to about that. Natural births is going up, but deaths is increasing faster. So our natural increase is actually declining. But you can see from this graph that immigration is almost as important as natural births in terms of driving the Australian population. And these are medium growth forecasts. So if I go down to simple burden of disease, again, for Australia, average disability, 12.2%. Years of life lost, about 13.5. So our annual burden of disease is about currently about $300 billion. And it doesn't take long for that to accumulate to a very large number. Okay, so going to a compartmental model, and as I say, this was developed by Adam Skinner formerly of the Sachs Institute, but now with the Sydney University Brain and Mind Institute. So here we have births generated much the same way, just using a crude birth rate and multiply by the total population, going to population 0 to 14. They spend 15 years in that box. So the formulation is just the population divided by 15. One of the shortcomings of a compartmental model like this is that it starts off assuming a homogeneous population in each group, which may or may not be correct.
Yeah, That was actually a question that I wanted to ask, looking at specifically at South Africa. Um, if we were to build a model like this for South Africa, I think it would be important to consider the demographics. Um, Generally, I'm not sure whether it is the case, but richer people might get, or wealthier people might get less children than poorer people. And it would be interesting to see how that influences the model.
Okay, I'll come to that at the end, but so just hold on to that and remind me. Again,
Yep.
this had a specific purpose of looking at smoking, and these groups are relatively homogenous, although Australia has a population pyramid, so I guess more like a truncated cone. It's not all that sharp at the top, and comparatively, we don't have a lot of old people yet. So here we just move these on, but we can look at the people turning 15, which is what we want to know for this model. So that's how we do that model. And over here I've got an open population model which is loaded with the population, male and female, for sort of 0 to 101, and individual crew death rates, which are in the original model just linked in using Excel. So if I put them in here, this is a two-dimensional array by age and sex. And I do it that way so that the numbers are easier to look at. So you get the column of ages with the corresponding sex beside it. If I'd done sex by age, they'd be across the page. But here we can actually use the some of the array functions within Stellar to work out people of school age. So we say, okay, what group do we want to look at? Sort of starting at 5, ending at 18. Then we use an array sum function. The syntax is quite complex initially, and if anybody wants a copy of these models, just email Nile and I'll send you details. I'll send them through. We could also look at whatever age group you want and people turning age. So here I've said I want to look at the people that are turning 15. And if I go back up to here and oops, run this, comparing the simple single stock population model, the open population model, and Adams' model, they're all pretty close. Actually, I need to. So within, I'm not sure why that would stop, what was playing up, but let's come on. I need to switch that on. Oh, put that in there, sorry. Now it should look better. So well, all the models are pretty much within a million and a half, 40 years into the future, and the number of people turning 15, if I calculate it individually or using Adams' compartmental model, are still pretty close, within sort of 10,040, so within 2%, 20 years out. So depending on what you're using the model for, it's always best to pick the simplest one. The beauty of using a model with every year in it is that if you change your mind and want to look at sort of 16 or 17 or whatever, it's easy enough to just pick the year you want. Whereas if you've just got a compartmental model, you've got to go and rebuild that section. Okay, so
Mark,
yes?
sorry, there was a question from JP. JP, can you maybe explain your question?
When the animation runs, the y-axis automatically adjusts itself to accommodate a numbers higher than it started out with. Can it be given a likely ceiling so that the y-axis stays steady during the animation?
Yes, indeed it can.
Thanks.
So if we go back to this one, I'll just tell the bottom to be 0 and the top to be 50. That should be enough to fix all of them, but just in case and I've got to keep 0 in there, so if I run it now, they don't jump about. So if you specify a range, it will stabilise it. Okay, so having got the single year of population, that gets a bit messy to graph because you don't want to have 100 columns. So again, there's a bit of complex mathematics, but we can go from an array which is 101 by 2 to one that's 21 by 2 by summing them all up. And we could also calculate out the median and percentage age group. So having done that, you can, I'll just slow this down a bit so we can actually see it. You can actually see the population pyramid changing. So in Australia, it's sort of not so much baby boomers, but we do have had a declining birth rate. So we've got we'll have lesser people coming through to pay my pension in years to come. And you can also calculate out births using crude birth rate or total fertility rate, because we know how many women are of childbearing age. In the Australian statistics, we use women between 15 and 45, and sort of at the moment an average total fertility rate of 1.85. So you could vary that over time, but that way you can predict to actually use the single stock population model. You need to have had someone calculate out the birth rate and the gross or the crude death rate. If you do it using individual crude death rates for each year, you can back calculate out what the overall crude death rate is and use that in a simpler model. Okay, so okay, this is an intervention that I've got for putting in a baby bonus. So I'll make sure that I've got just a graph of a comparative graph of births. And oops, sorry, I'll put that in here. Comparative. Plus
Mark, would
Yeah,
you be
sorry.
able to take a question?
Yep.
Yes. Okay. Sander, would you mind explaining your question?
Hi, Mark. It's a broad question actually, but your model prompted this. So what I'm saying is the world population has just passed 8 billion. By 2050, it's projected that 1/3 of the world's population will be in Africa. Combined with climate change, security risks, and reduced food security, this presents an unprecedented crisis for the continent and for the world. In what ways could the boundaries of population models be expanded that would provide policy insights to try and address and mitigate these future risks? And do you think that system dynamics could have a key role in enabling these policy insights? And and how?
Well, the first question is yes. I mean, when I look at the projections for the Nigerian population, I sort of have a tremendous foreboding of a disaster. It's just, it appears to be unsustainable. Just a growth of that size, and certainly in China, sort of looking at their population, that definitely seems to be sort of plateauing within the next sort of 15 years or so, if it hasn't already. It's a good idea is just to build a simple model to get a handle on the population and say, look, in the do nothing scenario, this is what the population is going to be, and it's just not sustainable. Where is the system going to break? Is there is it going to be sort of food shortages? Can they support themselves? Is the sort of burden of older people requiring more and more healthcare going to be sustainable, or are they just going to suffer from loss of life? There are a huge number of questions that need to be addressed. And I think sort of just starting with a population model is a great place, and then say, well, first of all, if we don't intervene, what's going to happen? And, how can we intervene? And short of sort of mass contraception programs or encouraging people not to have children, I don't know what's going to happen, because certainly the trend is for healthier outcomes. Sort of the crude, people are living longer due to sort of vaccines and all kinds of modern health things. So it's a real problem. Okay, so anyway, I just got
sorry, Mark. JP, would you like to ask your question, and then Mark, let's continue.
Just speculatively, I wondered if your model you just showed in that baby bonus box, does it allow you to enter a negative value?
Yeah, look, I'll just go back to that. So I just created a comparative graph of open population births. I'm going to go back up and switch on my intervention so that it will now run. It starts in 2022 and it's going to increase the conception rate by 25%. So if I go back down into here, and run it, we can see that we go from 300 to 400. So could we make it a negative? And the answer is yes. If I go back into my intervention and make it minus 25, it'll reduce the population. And let's see if I can go back and make this a comparative graph, and hopefully it will have stored the results for me. So you can see that in sort of a do nothing situation, the population is 40 million. With the baby bonus, it's 45 million. And with the contraceptive bonus, it's 36.4 million. So you can impact things in either a positive or negative scenario. Okay, now I'm sort of aware of the time, so I just want to go back to the earlier question, which is where I was splitting the population. So I did some work for northern New South Wales. So for those of you that don't know Australian geography, New South Wales is on the east coast and northern New South Wales is about near the top of New South Wales, about halfway up the east coast line, just south of Queensland. So here we started again with a simple model of population, and the population, oops, sorry, turn all these on. And we're looking at a population of about 500,000. Just put that away. Growing to about 700,000 in 40 years' time. And they've got a very ageing population. So we have the complex model where we did it just in 5-year age groups because that was the only census data we could get for that age group. So if we, I've got 10 seconds. So if I run this, you can see that the older population is getting quite large. Let's see what I've got in here in terms of sort of the people in different age groups. So the numbers in the 70s and 80s are growing quite rapidly. So it's going to, because all the retirees are moving into the district. We call it tree change when people leave the city and move to the north coast. So if you look at the whole population, it looks like you've got to build a whole lot of aged care places, and that's where you need to spend all your time. However, if you look at the Indigenous population, which is about 5%, 5 to 7%, they've got almost no old people, but as healthcare gets rolled out, the number of people that actually make it to 100 in 40 years is increasing, but they have a real population pyramid because their total fertility rate is roughly double what the non-Indigenous population is. So this is a case where you basically start off with one model, then just copy it and change the parameters for the Indigenous population or the other group that you're looking at, and then simply take one from the other. And so if we run that, we can compare sort of all three. so that the whole population has a completely different shape to the Indigenous population. So the people that are delivering social services have to work at Indigenous baby health and look at non-Indigenous aged care housing. So that's sort of gives you a real contrast as to what's actually happening within the one local region. And as I say, once you've built one population model, so in this case, just something like that, and it's all calibrated and working, you can just simply copy it, Control copy, paste, call it population 2. Oops, sorry. And then reparameterize it. And if you've got all the numbers in a spreadsheet, you can just import them in. So it's relatively easy to build as many different populations as you like. Okay, I'm going to see if I can get out of this and stop sharing and see what the questions are. If I put up conversation, so any questions? So I'll make these models available. So I will make these models available to anyone who wants them, and if you're anyone that's attending Billy's session either tonight or tomorrow, I'm not sure when it is, and you get the workshop version of Stella, you'll be able to run them.
Corné, you can continue with your question.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Mark, for the great presentation. This is really interesting to see in real time how these models are built and kind of the value of each of the different ones. I especially enjoyed the last when you showed the population dynamics as its total population may look the same, but the distribution of the people are very different. And if that is the reality, I mean, certain groups of the population, you know, we might see that the normal model shows that it grows and then stabilizes out. But in reality, if we take in consideration things like you had, like the age groups and the gender groups, we might actually see that we might have a collapse in population if there isn't enough young people having children. What is your thoughts about aspects like those for the future, where we have a collapse in population?
So I'm doing some work on the Chinese population, and theirs is about 1.4 billion, but because they've had sort of a one-child policy in place for so long, it's forecast to drop to about 700,000, so halve within the next 60 odd years, 60 to 80 years. So China, sort of, if nothing changes, will have a collapsing population because they have sort of, unlike Australia, which has a lot of migration, I'd say as much migration as births almost. China has a very small net loss every year. No one migrates into China or isn't at the moment. So it's the economists, although they don't use system dynamics, should, because these kind of models very quickly let you calculate out dependency ratios and things like that. So, you know, how many people are over 65 or what percentage of the people are over 65. So unless you have sort of private health insurance and private pensions, there's going to be a big burden drain on the economy through collapsing populations. And these things are really easy to forecast because all the people that are going to turn 65 in the next 60 years are already born.
Yeah, that's interesting, Mark, and I think that is the very amazing thing about SASDC, being able to show that and how few people are actually talking about it. Thank you for sharing that.
No problems. As I say, the beauty of having the age-specific model is that you can use it to predict targeted campaigns. So in Australia, our two major ones are bowel cancer screening for men at 50 and breast cancer screening for women in 5-year age groups. So you can tell every year how many people are going to be in that group, so you can plan well in advance for how many test kits and whatever you need, rather than getting an unpleasant surprise.
I think we have another 4 minutes before the next meeting or presentation is scheduled. But yeah, I thought this was a fascinating model and very applicable. How far have you gone with the South African model? Just out of interest.
I just prepared it for this particular talk, but I was sort of just curious. I'll just go back to that.
Yeah.
Share my screen and go back to this one. And I think if I just let these sort of graphs extend, so beyond sort of the projection rates of where they are, and model run specs go from 2000 to 2100. You can see that the sort of South African population should peak around 2070 at 80 million and then start to fall off. So whereas sort of Nigeria just keeps on going, and it cannot be sustainable. But here you see in the South African context that births and deaths cross over at about 2070. So your natural increase starts declining beyond that, and migration is negligible. So that pretty much tells you when the population is going to start. Well, it's not actually collapsing, but it's certainly plateaued out and falling.
Just out of interest, is your assumption for the start is immigration versus immigration? How do they compare? Just out of interest for.
Well, the numbers that I had for migration are relatively small, so it's
okay.
You know, sort of 75 people per 1,000. So it's sort of not very much at all.
Okay, and that's immigration. People.
That's people moving in. So you've got people coming in, not leaving, is what the.
Oh yes, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But again, I think in South African context, it would be interesting to do a demographic-based analysis.
Well, I don't know enough about sort of South African demographics, but certainly I think there would be regions where you're going to have declining population and other regions where it's going to be booming, and they're going to have quite different health needs.
Yes.
I mean, even just looking at, well, the Nigerian model I built was helping a guy work out how many primary schools did they need to build if they were going to get sort of 80% of the population to go to school.
Sure.
So
that's fascinating.
So that was just in global, but it doesn't tell you where to build them. Whereas, you know,
yes.
I think if you had sort of by regions or provinces or whatever the South African sort of small unit of population is, it would be very useful.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Mark. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. I think we enjoyed your presentation.